Arthur Vance stood on the second-floor balcony of his office, a sleek, glass-walled room that overlooked the sprawling back gardens of his Greenwich, Connecticut estate. It was 7:15 a.m. As he did every morning, he watched Elena Ramirez arrive through the rear service gate. Punctual, always punctual. Not a minute early, not a minute late. In the 2 years she had worked for him, she had never once been tardy. This level of precision should have been a source of satisfaction for any employer, a testament to a job well done. But for Arthur, it was a source of a strange, persistent disquiet. He watched her walk the long stone pathway with a steady, determined gait. Her black tote bag was always clutched tightly against her side, her eyes fixed on the ground just ahead. She wore a uniform of her own making, dark jeans, a simple cotton blouse, and white sneakers that had clearly seen better days. Yet there was something in her posture that intrigued him. It wasn't the defeated slump of someone beaten down by life. It was erect, dignified, as if she were propelled by some internal, unseen purpose that kept her spine straight against the weight of the world. Arthur knew people. At 45, having built a real estate empire from the ground up, he had dealt with every class of person imaginable, from desperate tenants to cutthroat billionaires. He had learned to read the subtle cues that separated the truly broken from those merely navigating a rough patch. Elena didn't fit neatly into either category. Her situation felt neither temporary nor completely hopeless. It felt permanent, a state of perpetual, quiet struggle. He descended the sweeping staircase and entered the vast, silent kitchen just as Elena was starting the coffee. As always, she greeted him with a polite, neutral, "Good morning, Mr. Vance," without lifting her eyes from the pan where she was preparing his eggs. Arthur returned the greeting with equal neutrality, pretending to read the morning paper while he observed her. Elena worked with a silent efficiency that was almost unnerving. Every movement was economical, every task completed to perfection. She never wasted a step, never left a surface half-wiped, never needed an instruction repeated. In 2 years, Arthur couldn't recall a single instance of a significant mistake. It was as if she poured every ounce of her mental energy into being the perfect, invisible housekeeper. "Elena," he said, as she placed the plate of perfectly cooked eggs in front of him, "why don't you sit down and have some coffee with me? This table is far too large for one person." She paused for a fraction of a second, the same micro-pause she always took when he tried to breach the professional boundary. "Thank you, Mr. Vance, but I need to finish cleaning the living room before 9 a.m. Always the same polite refusal, always the same invisible wall. Arthur hadn't built a fortune by being passive, but Elena had a way of declining that left no room for insistence without seeming boorish and intrusive. The rest of the morning followed its predictable, silent rhythm. Elena moved from room to room, a ghost of meticulous care, dusting, polishing, vacuuming. Arthur tried to work in his office, but he found his gaze drifting to the window whenever she passed through the garden below. There was a story there, he knew it. A story that felt too heavy for her slender shoulders, a secret she guarded with the same fierce efficiency she used to clean his home. Around 11 a.m., Arthur was on a heated phone call with a contractor, arguing over a shipment of faulty materials, when he heard a strange clatter from the living room. He excused himself from the call and went to investigate. He found Elena on her knees, gathering a few books that had fallen from a low shelf. There was nothing unusual about the scene itself except for the way she was moving. It was too slow, too deliberate, as if each motion required immense concentrated effort. "Is everything all right?" Arthur asked, his voice softer than he intended. Elena's head snapped up, and in that unguarded moment, he saw something he'd never noticed before. There were deep, dark circles under her eyes, bruises of exhaustion that no amount of sleep could seemingly erase. This wasn't just the fatigue of a hard day's work. This was something deeper, more chronic. "Yes, sir. Everything is fine. I just tripped," she replied, but her voice was fainter than usual, lacking its normal, steady tone. Arthur watched as she pushed herself up. She braced her hand on the edge of a coffee table for a brief second before straightening completely. It was a subtle, almost imperceptible movement, but he saw it, and from that moment on, he started paying closer attention. During lunch, he noticed that Elena barely touched the meal she had prepared for herself. She ate a few bites of rice and a small piece of chicken, but mostly she just pushed the food around her plate with her fork. When he offered her the leftovers to take home, She refused quickly, as she always did. "I have food at home, thank you." Another polite lie. Arthur was beginning to count just how many she told throughout the day. They were small, social falsehoods, but each one was a brick in the wall she built between herself and the world. It was during the mid-afternoon coffee break that Arthur saw something that changed everything. Elena was in the kitchen, and thinking he wasn't looking, she opened that ever-present black tote bag. She pulled out a small prescription pill bottle. Arthur couldn't see the name of the medication, but he recognized the pharmacy's logo on the label. It was an upscale specialty pharmacy, one known for carrying expensive imported drugs and treatments for specific serious conditions. Elena quickly took 2 pills, washing them down with water, and slipped the bottle back into her bag. When Arthur walked into the kitchen a moment later, she was her normal, composed self again, as if nothing had happened. "Elena, are you feeling all right? I can call a doctor if you'd like." "No need, Mr. Vance. Just a slight headache." A headache that required medication from a high-end specialty pharmacy. Arthur didn't buy the explanation for a second, but he didn't press. Not yet. The afternoon wore on, with Arthur now hyper-aware of every detail of Elena's behavior. She worked tirelessly, but he now noticed the frequent discreet pauses, the way she would lean on the broom for a few extra seconds, her eyes closed, the deep breath she took before climbing the stairs, the way she would sit on the edge of a bed for a moment while making it, gathering her strength. At 5 p.m., Elena put away her cleaning supplies and retrieved her bag. As always, she came to his office to announce her departure. "I finished for the day, Mr. Vance. I'll see you tomorrow." "Elena, wait a moment," Arthur said, standing up from his desk. "I'd like to talk to you about something." He saw her body tense immediately. "Did I do something wrong?" "No, not at all. In fact, it's the opposite." He gestured for her to take a seat, but she remained standing by the door. "You've been working here for 2 years, and we've never had a serious conversation about your compensation. I want to give you a substantial raise." Elena blinked several times, clearly stunned. "A raise? A 50% raise," Arthur stated. "And I want to formalize your employment completely. A proper contract, health insurance, paid time off, the works." He expected to see joy, or at least relief. Instead, he saw panic. Pure, unadulterated panic flashed in her eyes. She grew pale and began to shake her head. "I can't accept, Mr. Vance." "Why not?" I don't deserve that much. The work I do is worth what you already pay me." It was an illogical, nonsensical answer, and Arthur knew she was lying. "Elena, you are the best, most reliable employee I have ever had. You deserve far more than what I'm offering." "I cannot accept," she repeated, her voice firmer now, the invisible wall going up again. "But thank you for the consideration." He watched, baffled, as she hurried out of the house. Something was terribly wrong. No one in her position turned down a 50% raise and full benefits without a very, very serious reason, and he was determined to find out what it was. That night, Arthur couldn't get Elena out of his mind. He paced the silent, cavernous rooms of his mansion, the echo of his footsteps a lonely counterpoint to the storm of questions in his head. He replayed every interaction they'd had over the past 2 years, her consistent refusal to engage in small talk, her polite but firm rejection of any small favor, the way she always seemed to be racing against an invisible clock, desperate to leave the moment her shift ended. The puzzle pieces were scattered before him, but he couldn't yet see the full picture. The panic in her eyes when he'd offered her a raise and health insurance, that was the piece that didn't fit. It wasn't just pride, it was fear. But fear of what? The next morning, Arthur was on his balcony at 7 a.m. waiting. When Elena walked through the gate, he watched her with a new, analytical eye. He noticed the subtle slowness in her movements, a careful conservation of energy that spoke of a deep, underlying exhaustion. At breakfast, he tried a different approach, a more direct, personal line of questioning. "Elena, do you live far from here?" "Not too far, sir." "Do you have family?" A long pause before she answered. "I have children." Another, even longer pause. "I have a daughter." It was the first truly personal piece of information she had ever shared in 2 years. Arthur felt a small sense of victory, but it was immediately tempered by the flicker of profound pain he saw in her eyes as she mentioned her child. "How old is she?" He pressed gently. 8. That must be a wonderful age. Kids that age are always so full of energy. Elena didn't answer. She simply gathered his plate and retreated to the kitchen, but not before Arthur saw the glint of tears welling in her eyes. He knew he had touched a nerve, a deep source of her sorrow. The day progressed with Arthur observing her even more closely, his concern mounting with every passing hour. Around 2 p.m., while Elena was cleaning the grand living room, the moment he had been subconsciously dreading finally happened. She was running the vacuum cleaner when she suddenly stopped, leaning heavily against the wall and closing her eyes. Arthur thought she was just catching her breath, but then he saw her legs begin to tremble. She tried to take another step to resume her work, but her body betrayed her. She simply collapsed. The vacuum cleaner fell to the floor with a loud clatter, and Elena lay still on the Persian rug, unconscious. Arthur's heart leaped into his throat. He rushed to her side, his mind racing. She was pale, her breathing shallow, her pulse rapid and thready. He scooped her up. She felt frighteningly light in his arms, and carried her to the nearest sofa. He immediately pulled out his phone and dialed 911. "No, Elena," she murmured, her eyes fluttering open a few moments later, her voice weak and disoriented. "No, doctor." "Elena, you fainted. You need medical attention," he said, his voice firm but laced with worry. "No, please," she said, her voice rising with an edge of hysteria. It was almost a cry. "Please don't call a doctor. I'm fine. I'm okay." Arthur had never seen such raw, primal desperation in anyone's eyes. "You are clearly not fine," he insisted. "When was the last time you ate a proper meal?" "I eat," she answered, but the lie was transparent, pathetic. "When was the last time you slept through the night?" Elena didn't answer. She just stared at him, her eyes wide with fear. "Elena, what is going on?" he asked, his voice softening. "Why are you working yourself to death? Why do you refuse help? Why are you so afraid of a doctor?" That was what finally broke her. The dam of her carefully constructed composure shattered, and she began to cry. It wasn't a delicate, quiet weeping. It was a storm of deep, ragged sobs, the sound of someone who had been holding back an ocean of pain for far, far too long. Arthur sat beside her on the sofa, and for the first time in 2 years, she didn't flinch or pull away when he moved closer. "I need this job," she whispered between sobs, the words torn from her. "I can't lose this job." "You are not going to lose your job," he said, his voice a low, steady anchor in her storm. "But you have to tell me what's happening." Elena looked at him, her face streaked with tears, her eyes red and swollen. "I can't, Mr. Vance. I can't talk about it." Arthur saw that pushing her further would be cruel. She was in a state of emotional shock. He helped her to her feet, insisted she drink some water, and told her to go home early. "Go home and rest, Elena. We'll talk tomorrow." She retrieved her bag and headed for the door, but this time, instead of simply letting her go, Arthur made a decision. He was going to find out what was happening to Elena Ramirez, and he was going to find out today. 15 minutes after she left, Arthur was in his car, driving in the direction she had gone. He felt a pang of guilt, a sense of invading her privacy, but his worry was a far more powerful force. Elena was in a desperate situation, and he couldn't help her if he didn't understand what it was. He kept a safe distance, following the public bus she had boarded. She got off in a working-class neighborhood, a world away from the manicured lawns and gated mansions of Greenwich. Arthur parked his luxury sedan on a side street, feeling conspicuously out of place, and began to follow her on foot. Elena walked quickly, with a sense of purpose, but Arthur noticed she wasn't heading toward the residential streets. Instead, her path led to a large, imposing brick building that he recognized instantly, the County General Hospital. Arthur felt his stomach clench as he watched her walk through the main entrance. 1,000 possibilities, all of them terrible, flooded his mind. Was Elena sick? Was a family member hospitalized? Why had she never said anything? He waited a few minutes before following her inside, the bustling lobby providing enough cover for him to go unnoticed. He saw Elena head for the main bank of elevators and press the button for the 4th floor. Arthur knew this hospital. He had made substantial donations to it over the years, his name on a plaque in the main atrium. He knew exactly what was on the 4th floor: pediatric oncology. The revelation hit him like a physical blow, knocking the air from his lungs. Elena had an 8-year-old daughter, and she was visiting the children's cancer ward. The scattered puzzle pieces began to snap into place, forming a picture so devastating it made him feel physically ill. The expensive prescription drugs, the chronic, bone-deep exhaustion, the refusal of a raise and health insurance. Perhaps out of fear that a formal employment record could interfere with some form of public assistance she was barely clinging to. The terror in her eyes when he'd suggested calling a doctor. She couldn't afford an ambulance bill, not when every single penny was going somewhere else. Elena Ramirez wasn't just working to survive. She was fighting to save her daughter's life. Arthur leaned against the cool wall of the hospital corridor, feeling his own legs go weak. For 2 years, he had shared his home with a woman who was living through every parent's worst nightmare, and he had been completely, utterly oblivious. While he had been stewing over stock portfolios and real estate deals, Elena had been single-handedly holding her world together. He looked at the elevator that had carried her away and made a decision that would change both of their lives forever. He was going to find out exactly what his employee's daughter was facing. And then, whether she wanted him to or not, he was going to help. Because some things in life were more important than pride or professional protocols, and an 8-year-old child fighting for her life was definitively one of them. Arthur rode the next elevator to the 4th floor, his heart pounding a nervous, unsteady rhythm against his ribs. The doors opened onto the pediatric oncology wing, and he was immediately hit by the scent. A sterile, chemical smell of disinfectant layered with something he couldn't quite place, until he realized it was the smell of institutionalized sorrow. It clung to the air, to the pale green walls, to the faces of the people who walked the halls with the heavy shuffling gait of those carrying an unbearable load. He moved slowly down the corridor, trying to look casual, searching for Elena without being conspicuous. He passed rooms decorated with colorful drawings and get-well-soon cards, a heartbreaking attempt to inject childhood cheer into a place defined by illness. He saw families huddled on worn-out benches, some weeping quietly, others staring into the middle distance with the hollowed-out expression of those who had run out of tears. Arthur had never been in a place that radiated such concentrated, silent suffering. He turned a corner and finally saw her. Elena was sitting on a hard plastic chair next to a partially open door, and for the first time in the 2 years he had known her, Arthur saw her genuinely smile. It wasn't the polite, distant curve of her lips she used at his house. This was a real smile, one that reached her tired eyes and filled them with a light of pure, unadulterated love. She was speaking softly to someone inside the room. "Mommy brought the book you asked for, my love," Arthur heard her say, her voice transformed. It was no longer the neutral, professional tone of his housekeeper. It was soft, melodic, and full of life. "Do you want me to read to you?" Arthur positioned himself discreetly, where he could see into the room through the crack in the door. What he saw made his heart fracture. A small, fragile-looking girl was lying in a hospital bed, tethered to a constellation of machines by a web of tubes and wires. She had no hair, and her skin had the pale, almost translucent quality of a long-term chemotherapy patient. But her eyes, large and dark like her mother's, lit up as she looked at Elena. And in those eyes, Arthur recognized something immediately: pure, unyielding courage. "Are you tired, Mommy?" the little girl asked, her voice weak but laced with a touching concern. "Your eyes are red again." Elena quickly brushed a hand across her face, a futile attempt to hide her exhaustion. "I'm not tired, my sweet girl. I'm perfect." "You always say you're perfect," the child countered with a wisdom beyond her years. "But I know when you're sad. Is it about the money again?" Arthur watched Elena close her eyes for a brief second, a silent, desperate battle against the tears she refused to let her daughter see. "Don't you worry about things like that, Isabella. Mommy always figures things out." Isabella. Her name was Isabella, and she was clearly in the advanced stages of a devastating illness. A dull, hot anger began to build in Arthur's chest. It was an impotent rage at the universe, at the sheer injustice of it all, and most of all, at himself, for his own blindness, for failing to see the struggle that had been unfolding right under his nose. "The nurse said we have to pay another bill today, Mommy," Isabella continued, her voice small. "She said if we don't, they might have to stop the new medicine." Arthur saw Elena's body go rigid. "The nurse shouldn't have told you that, mija. That's for grown-ups to worry about. Mommy will handle it." "But how? You already work all day and all night. There are no more hours left to work." The child's innocent, logical question echoed in the sterile hallway like a scream. Arthur finally understood. Elena wasn't just working to make ends meet. She was literally racing against the clock, trading her own life force for a few more hours, a few more days of the medicine that was keeping her daughter alive. Elena opened the book and began to read, her voice a soothing balm, but Arthur noticed her hands were trembling slightly. He backed away from the door and walked toward the nurse's station. He needed to understand the full scope of the situation before he could act. "Excuse me," he said to a middle-aged nurse who seemed less frantic than the others. "Could you give me some information on a patient? Isabella Ramirez." The nurse gave him a wary, professional look. "Are you a family member, sir?" Arthur hesitated. Lying in a hospital felt wrong, but he needed answers. "I'm her mother's employer. Elena has worked for me for 2 years. I've only just found out about the situation, and I want to help, but I need to understand what we're dealing with." The nurse's expression softened with a mix of pity and relief. "Oh, you're Elena's boss? She's mentioned you. Says you're a good man." Arthur felt a sharp pang of guilt. If Elena thought he was a good man, it was only because she didn't know how little he had cared to ask about her life. "Isabella's situation is complicated," the nurse continued, lowering her voice. "She has acute lymphoblastic leukemia. It's a type of cancer that can have a high success rate, but her case was already advanced when she was diagnosed. The prognosis is good if she gets the proper treatment. We're talking an 80% chance of full remission, but it's a long, expensive road. At least 2 more years of intensive chemotherapy, imported medications, constant scans." Arthur felt a flicker of cautious relief. An 80% chance was far better than the scenarios he had been imagining. "And what does a treatment like that cost?" The nurse sighed, a sound heavy with the weight of countless similar conversations. "For a family like Elena's, it's an impossible sum. She's already exhausted her savings, sold everything she owned. She works day and night to cover what she can, but she's falling further and further behind. What happens if she can't pay? We do what we can with the state-funded basic protocols," the nurse said, her face grim. "But it's not enough. Isabella needs specific targeted drugs that are only available through private payment." "And if she doesn't get those specific drugs?" Arthur asked, dreading the answer. The nurse didn't have to say a word. The sorrow in her eyes said everything. Arthur thanked her and walked away, his mind working furiously. He needed to know the exact cost of Isabella's complete treatment plan. He returned to his discreet vantage point near Isabella's room. Elena was still reading, her voice a steady, loving murmur, creating a small island of peace in a sea of sickness. "Mommy?" Isabella asked when the story was over. "When I get out of here, can we have our own house?" "Of course, my love," Elena answered, her voice thick with unshed tears. "We'll have a little house, just for us, with a garden where you can plant flowers. And you won't have to work so much." Elena hesitated. "Mommy will always work as much as she needs to take care of you. But I want you to be happy too, Mommy. You never laugh anymore." Arthur watched as a single tear escaped and traced a path down Elena's cheek. "I'm happy whenever I'm with you, my sweet girl. I don't need anything else." At 6 p.m., Arthur saw Elena get up, lean over, and kiss Isabella's forehead. "Mommy has to go now, my love, but I'll be back first thing in the morning." "Are you going home to sleep tonight?" Isabella asked, her voice full of hope. Elena paused. "Yes, I'm going home." Arthur knew it was a lie. For the past 15 minutes, he had watched her speaking with other mothers in the hallway. Several of them were carrying makeshift pillows and blankets. It was obvious they slept at the hospital, unwilling to be more than a few feet away from their sick children. He followed Elena discreetly as she left the room. She went to the elevator, but instead of going down to the ground floor, she pressed the button for the basement. Arthur waited for the next car and followed. The hospital basement was even more grim than the upper floors, a labyrinth of pipes and storage rooms. He walked down a long corridor until he found a makeshift resting area, where a handful of people had settled in for the night on thin floor mats and worn-out cots. And there, in a corner, was Elena. She was arranging a thin blanket over a mat that looked barely an inch thick. Beside her was a plastic bag with a change of clothes and a package of crackers. That, he realized, was the sum total of her worldly possessions. He watched as she pulled a small notebook and a pen from her tote bag and began to write, her brow furrowed in concentration. He could see she was doing sums, calculating bills, trying to make impossible numbers add up. It was when she opened her bag to put the notebook away that Arthur saw something that broke him. Inside, next to the expensive pill bottle, was a delicate gold bracelet and a simple ring. They looked like the last vestiges of a former life, the only items of value she had left. He watched her pick up the bracelet, her fingers tracing its pattern with a loving reverence. It was clearly a cherished memento, a link to a happier time. She held it for a long moment before placing it carefully back in her bag. Arthur understood instantly. She was preparing to sell them. Those last sentimental pieces were all that stood between Isabella and the cessation of her treatment. He backed away silently and left the hospital, his mind reeling. In his car, he sat for a long time, trying to process the sheer, crushing weight of what he had witnessed. Elena Ramirez wasn't just a struggling employee. She was a warrior, a desperate mother sacrificing her health, her comfort, her past, and her future, all for a chance to save her daughter. For 2 years, he had seen her work with tireless dedication, and he had never once asked why. Now he knew. She rushed from his mansion to the hospital every single day. She slept on a concrete floor. She worked herself to the point of collapse, and she did it all alone, in silence. Arthur drove home, but his mind was still in that hospital basement. He had the resources to solve Elena's entire problem in a matter of minutes. The amount of money that was a life-or-death struggle for her was an amount he wouldn't even notice was gone. But he knew he couldn't just show up and offer her a check. He had seen her pride. It was fierce, and it was probably one of the only things keeping her upright. He had to find a way to help her without shattering her dignity, because Arthur was beginning to realize that for Elena, her dignity was the only thing she had left, besides her daughter, and he would not be the one to take that from her too. Arthur waited until after lunch the next day to approach Elena. He needed to choose his moment carefully, a time when she wasn't immersed in a task she could use as an escape. He found her in the library, quietly organizing his collection of first editions. He closed the heavy oak doors behind him, the soft click echoing in the silent room. "Elena, I need to speak with you. Please, sit down." She stopped instantly, her body going rigid with that familiar tension. "Did I do something wrong, Mr. Vance?" "No, Elena, you've done nothing wrong," he said, his voice gentle. He sat in a leather armchair opposite the sofa and gestured for her to join him. "In fact, it's the other way around. I've done something wrong." She perched on the edge of the sofa, clearly bracing herself for a reprimand, or worse, a dismissal. Her hands were clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were white. "Yesterday, after you fainted," he began, choosing his words with care, "I was extremely worried. When you left, I decided to follow you." The color drained from Elena's face. She looked as if he had struck her. You followed me?" "I know about Isabella," he said softly. The words hung in the air between them, a confession and an accusation all at once. He watched the precise moment her carefully constructed world of secrets crumbled. She began to tremble, a violent, uncontrollable shaking. I can explain," she whispered, her voice a thread of sound. "Elena, you don't have to explain anything. I'm the one who needs to apologize. For 2 years you have worked in my home, carrying the heaviest burden a mother can possibly carry, and I never once asked. I never once cared enough to see past the surface. That was what finally broke her." The tears she had held back for so long came in a torrent, not of quiet sadness, but of complete and utter despair. It was the sound of a soul that had finally been seen, and the exposure was both a relief and an agony. "Mr. Vance, please," she sobbed, her face in her hands. "Please don't fire me. I know I should have told you about Isa, but I was so afraid you'd think I couldn't do my job properly, that I'd need too much time off. Elena, stop, breathe," Arthur said, his voice a calm anchor. He went to the small bar in the corner and poured a glass of water, his own hands unsteady. When he returned, she was still weeping as if her heart was breaking. "Drink this," he said, sitting beside her on the sofa. "And listen to me very carefully. You are not being fired. Not now, not ever. It doesn't matter how many days you need to take off. Your job is secure." She looked up, her eyes red and swollen. "But I lied to you. For 2 years, I lied every single day. You didn't lie, Elena. You protected your family. There is a world of difference." He took a deep breath. "Now tell me everything. When did Isabella get sick? How did you find out?" Hesitantly at first, then with a flood of pent-up emotion, the story poured out of her. Isabella had been diagnosed 2.5 years ago. The initial symptoms, fatigue, fevers, had been dismissed as normal childhood illnesses. But then came the unexplained bruises, the dramatic weight loss. The diagnosis was a sledgehammer, acute lymphoblastic leukemia, already in an advanced stage. The doctors were direct. With aggressive, expensive treatment, her chances were good. Without it, she had months. I was working in retail back then, Elena said, her voice hoarse. Minimum wage, no health insurance, no savings. When I saw the cost of the first round of chemotherapy, I knew I had to do something drastic. That's when I saw the ad for this job. So you came to work here to pay for her treatment? Yes. I knew the pay would be better. I thought if I worked hard enough, if I was perfect, if I never missed a day, maybe I could earn enough to save her. Elena, why didn't you ever tell me? I could have helped from the very beginning. Because I was afraid, she answered with raw simplicity. I was afraid you would pity me. Afraid you'd think I was looking for a handout. Afraid you'd treat me differently. I needed to earn the money, not beg for it. This wouldn't have been begging, Elena. This would have been asking for help. To me, there was no difference, she whispered. Arthur understood. For Elena, accepting charity was an admission of failure as a mother. It was a matter of dignity, a concept that ran deeper than simple pride. And now? What is the financial situation now? She hesitated. It's difficult. I paid for the first few months by selling everything I had. Furniture, jewelry, everything. But the money is gone, and the treatment still has at least a year to go. How much do you need per month? $10,000, she said, the number barely audible. For the specific drugs, the scans, the specialist consultations. Arthur did the math. $120,000 for the next year. To him, it was the price of a luxury car he might buy on a whim. To her, it was an insurmountable mountain. Elena, I am going to pay for Isabella's treatment. No. The answer was immediate, reflexive, and absolute. I cannot accept. Why not? Because it is not your responsibility. She is my daughter. I am the one who has to find a way. And if you can't find a way? Arthur challenged gently. What happens to Isabella then? Elena didn't answer, but a fresh wave of tears streamed down her face. Listen to me, he said, his voice firm but kind. I have more than enough money to cover this entire treatment without even noticing it's gone. For me, it is a simple transaction. For you, it is your daughter's life. It makes no sense to let her suffer because of your pride. It's not pride, she cried, jumping to her feet. It's dignity. It's knowing that I am capable of caring for my own child without depending on the charity of others. Arthur stood as well. Then tell me this, Elena. If our situations were reversed, if I had a sick child and no money, and you had the means to help, would you let my child die to preserve my dignity? Elena opened her mouth to answer, but no words came out. He had found the flaw in her armor. Your daughter cannot afford the price of your dignity, Elena, he said softly. She didn't choose to be sick. She didn't choose to be born to a mother who would rather watch her fade away than accept help. Don't say that, she sobbed. Don't say I'd rather watch her die. I would do anything for her, then accept my help. I can't, she whispered. I can't live knowing I owe my daughter's life to someone else. Arthur paused, seeing the war raging within her. He needed to reframe it, to find a way she could accept. Elena, may I tell you something about myself? She nodded, still crying. I was a father once. She looked up, stunned. In 2 years, he had never mentioned a family. I had a son. His name was Henry. He died when he was 6 years old. Elena covered her mouth with her hand, her own sorrow momentarily forgotten in the face of his. It was leukemia, he said, the words tasting like ash. The same type Isabella has. The difference is, when Henry got sick, I had all the money in the world. I flew him to the best doctors, the best hospitals. I tried every experimental treatment. I did everything, and it still wasn't enough. He fought back his own tears. The irony is, my son died with access to the best care on the planet, and your daughter might die for the lack of it. When Henry died, he continued, his voice thick with a pain that was still raw. I thought my life was over. I kept working, kept making money, but it was all meaningless. Until yesterday. Yesterday, when I saw Isabella in that hospital, when I saw you fighting all alone, I realized my life might still have a purpose. Maybe I can help another child beat the disease that my own son couldn't. He looked directly into her eyes. This isn't charity, Elena. It's not pity. It's a chance for me to do something that matters, for the first time in a very long time. Will you let me do that? Will you let me help? Elena was silent for a long time, her gaze on her own trembling hands. Arthur could almost see the battle being waged in her mind. Finally, She looked up. "If I accept," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "it has to be on my terms." "Name them." "First, I continue to work here. As your employee, I will not be treated any differently." "Done," he agreed instantly. "Second, when Isabella is well, I will find a way to repay you. I don't know how, but I will." "Elena, it's my condition," she insisted. He smiled. "All right." Agreed. "And third, no one else can know, not even Isabella. She has to believe that her mother figured it out. She has to believe her mother was strong enough to save her." "Why?" "Because I don't want my daughter to grow up thinking we needed a handout to survive. I want her to believe in her mother's strength." Arthur understood. Elena was protecting not just her own dignity, but her daughter's future sense of security and pride. Agreed. "But how will we explain the continuation of her treatment?" Elena thought for a moment. "I'll tell her I got a better job, that you gave me a big promotion." "Technically, it's not a lie," Arthur said, a genuine smile spreading across his face. "You're getting a raise of $10,000 a month." For the first time since the conversation began, Elena laughed through her tears. "Thank you, Arthur," she said, using his first name for the first time. "Thank you for everything." "Don't thank me yet," he said. "Thank me when Isabella is cured and playing in the garden." She stood up, and to his surprise, she hugged him. It was a hug of gratitude, of profound relief, of renewed hope. "Can I ask you one more thing?" she asked as she pulled away. "Anything. Would you like to meet Isabella? In person?" Arthur's heart leaped. "You would let me?" "I think she would love to meet my boss," Elena said, a real warm smile finally reaching her eyes. "Especially since he's as kind as she always imagined." "I would be honored to meet her," Arthur replied. And for the first time in years, Arthur Vance felt truly wealthy. He was rich with purpose, rich with hope, and rich with the unexpected gift of a new family, found in the most unlikely of circumstances. The path ahead would be difficult, but for the first time, he would not be walking it alone, and neither would she.